I know how to run a hair salon, but for small business insurance, I chose my State Farm agent. She's a small business owner too, so she knew how to help me personalize my policies. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Talk to an agent today.
This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, and welcome back to the Curious Kid Podcast, Season 3. We have so many fun things to get curious about this season, and we have an exciting announcement.
We are now part of a podcast network.
The good folks over at Big Heads Media got in touch with us and asked us to be a part of their podcast network. We were thrilled about the opportunity to join their network of fantastic podcasts. In fact, stick around at the end of each episode this season to hear a promo from one of the amazing podcasts that are part of our new network.
A lot of the podcasts in the network are for grown-ups.
That's right. Many of the podcasts that are in our network are for adults. So all you mommies and daddies out there should give them a listen. I have listened to a bunch of them already, and I've enjoyed every single one. Okay, Olivia, what are we getting curious about this week?
This week we are getting curious about earthquakes.
And it's going to be awesome. Earthquakes are really interesting. What's the question of the week?
The question of the week is, which state in the United States has the most earthquakes?
This podcast is sponsored by Skylight Frame. Mother's Day is almost here. What are you getting her? Something that shows you care. Something that makes her feel loved. Something that won't stress you out. Something like the Skylight Frame. The Skylight Frame is the perfect gift. It's a touchscreen photo frame your whole family can upload photos to, from wherever they are in the world. It's a way to share with her all the moments that matter. It sets up in seconds. You can even make sure that it's already loaded with photos when your mom opens her Mother's Day gift. And her Skylight Frame can hold thousands of the treasured photos you share. It's an easy, heartfelt way for mom to stay connected with those who matter most. It really is the perfect gift. Now, as a special Mother's Day offer for our listeners, get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/easy. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/easy. Get 15% off your Mother's Day purchase now at skylightframe.com/easy.
Okay, maybe we should start by explaining what an earthquake is.
An earthquake is when the ground shakes because of movement under the Earth's surface.
If you listened to episode 36, Curious About Volcanoes, you already know that the outer layer of the Earth is called the crust. The crust is made up of different giant pieces like a jigsaw puzzle, and these pieces are always moving.
The moving pieces usually move very slowly.
That's right. You can't even feel them moving, even though they are in constant motion. But sometimes, those pieces, called tectonic plates, can move faster, causing the ground to shake.
Earthquakes can cause large cracks in the ground.
And the very strong earthquakes can even knock down structures like buildings and bridges. You may be wondering how earthquakes start.
The place on the ground where earthquakes start is called the focus.
And the spot above the focus on the ground is called the epicenter. This is the spot where the earthquake is the strongest. Strong earthquakes can be felt far away from the epicenter.
How long do earthquakes last?
Earthquakes are usually very quick. They last less than a minute most times, but they can cause a lot of damage very quickly.
How do we know how strong an earthquake is?
Great question. If you remember our episode on tornadoes, you might remember that tornadoes are assigned numbers based on the amount of damage they do. Those numbers go from 0 to 5.
Earthquakes also get numbers. The higher the number, the stronger the earthquake.
That's right. But the way they figure out the number for earthquakes and tornadoes is very different. With earthquakes, there is a machine called a seismograph that determines how strong the earthquake is.
Do the numbers go 0 to 5 on earthquakes?
That would be convenient, right? Because it would be the same as tornadoes. Well, unfortunately, it's different. Earthquakes get a score from 1 to 10. Earthquakes that score a 1 or 2 are so weak, you usually can't even feel them.
Earthquakes between 3 and 5 are weak. You can usually feel them, but it's little damage.
Earthquakes with a magnitude between 5 and 7 can be felt by everyone nearby and cause damage.
For a score of 7 or higher, there will be a lot of damage.
Earthquakes that score this high are very dangerous, especially closer to the epicenter.
How do the numbers work? Is a score of 2 twice as strong as a score of 1?
That would also be convenient, but no. Every whole number you go up, the earthquake is 10 times stronger. So an earthquake that has a 4.0 magnitude is actually 10 times stronger than an earthquake with a 3.0 magnitude.
Have you ever felt an earthquake, Daddy?
I have, but just once. And guess what? I didn't even realize it was an earthquake because we don't usually get earthquakes here in the Northeast. It happened on August 23rd, 2011, 8 years ago. It happened in the afternoon, and the epicenter was in Louisa County, Virginia.
Hang on a second. You were able to feel an earthquake all the way from Virginia?
I was. It was a magnitude 5.8 earthquake, which is a pretty strong earthquake. When I felt it, I thought it was something different, like maybe a big airplane flying overhead. It wasn't until I saw it on the news and heard from family and friends that felt it too, that I began to realize it was an earthquake that I felt.
How many earthquakes are there?
Lots and lots and lots. Very weak earthquakes are happening almost continuously somewhere in the world, but stronger earthquakes are more rare. So there are about 100 earthquakes worldwide every year between a magnitude 6 and 7. But if you talk about the strongest earthquakes that are higher than a magnitude of 9, there is only one earthquake that's strong about every 10 to 50 years.
Do we get lots of earthquakes in the United States?
We do, but not as many as lots of other countries. For example, Japan and Indonesia get tons of earthquakes. China, Iran, and Turkey have had the most catastrophic earthquakes that cause the most damage. You have to be very careful with earthquakes, even after they are done, because it could still be dangerous.
Why would you still have to be careful when the earthquake is finished?
Sometimes with earthquakes, you get things called foreshocks and aftershocks. They are smaller earthquakes either before or after the biggest one.
Foreshocks come before, aftershocks come after earthquakes.
Exactly. So even if you are safe after an earthquake, there is still a good chance there will be a smaller earthquake following the big one.
Can scientists predict earthquakes?
No. There is really no way to predict earthquakes. We know which parts of the world are more likely to get earthquakes because they rest on fault lines, which usually occur on the boundaries between those tectonic plates that move under the crust. People that live near fault lines will occasionally get earthquakes, but even so, it is impossible for them to know exactly when they are coming or how strong they will be.
Which state gets the most earthquakes?
I was actually surprised when I researched the answer to this question. I always thought California got the most earthquakes, but I was wrong. In fact, as of the last few years, California isn't even in second place anymore.
Alaska has more earthquakes than any other state.
That's absolutely right. Alaska gets more than 1,000 earthquakes in the average year. A few things to remember. First, Alaska is the biggest state in the United States by a lot. Alaska is about 2.5 times bigger than the second biggest state, Texas. So being so big helps it to have the most earthquakes. Also, don't forget that almost all of those earthquakes are minor ones that do no damage and sometimes can't even be detected without using a seismograph.
Which state comes in second?
Well, it used to be California, but now it's Oklahoma. What's happening in Oklahoma is really crazy. Before 2014, Oklahoma usually averaged about 50 earthquakes a year, with many of them being very small. All of a sudden, in 2014, the number went up to 585, and in 2015, it went up to 888.
What caused it to go up so fast?
Many scientists believe that drilling for gas and oil underground caused the ground to destabilize, resulting in lots of earthquakes. Thankfully, the problem is being addressed, and the number of earthquakes in Oklahoma started to go down after 2015. Now we know that we can possibly play a role in creating earthquakes. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's podcast, episode 53 on earthquakes.
Great job, Olivia. Don't forget that in season 3, just like we've been doing from the beginning, we are going to have listener suggestion episodes every 5 weeks. So don't forget to send us an email to CuriousKidPodcast@gmail.com to let us know what you are curious about and leave us your name, age, and hometown so we can thank you if we cover your topic in a future episode. Stay tuned after the outro music to hear a promo from one of our podcast partners. This week's promo is for the pop culture podcast, Wasting Time. Join us next week when we will get curious about fall leaves. As always, thank you so much for listening and getting curious with us.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris.
I'm Beth.
And I'm Matt.
Join us every Wednesday for Wasting Time, our podcast where we talk about pop culture, life, and our favorite things.
From the movies we love to the TV shows we're obsessed with.
And from politics to parenting to whatever else is on our mind.
Give us a listen each Wednesday and then find us on Facebook and Twitter to tell us what you're loving.
We're part of the Big Heads Media Group, and we can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever else you find your podcasts. Come waste some time with us.